Now, I am delighted to introduce Ross Holt, who is going to tell you a little bit about tonight's program and why we're having it and some other information that he knows. Thank you.
Just to let you know some of the things, the kind of things the Friends do. If you're sitting in a folding chair, those chairs were purchased with donations to the Friends of the Library. And if you're sitting in a green chair, plastic green chairs, those were purchased by the Asheboro Public Library Foundation. So we have a lot of strong supporters. Thank you, Linda. We do have a dual purpose here tonight. Certainly to hear from John McGlohon about witnessing one of the most momentous events in human history, but also to inaugurate a new collection of books and DVDs provided to the library through a major bequest. Last summer, a Randleman native named Margaret Cashatt Taylor passed away in Dearborn, Michigan. Ms. Taylor's husband, Robert C. Taylor Jr., predeceased her. In her estate, Ms. Taylor bequeathed her husband's outstanding collection of World War II books and DVDs to the library, along with a generous stipend to support and enhance the collection. That funding will allow us to increase the collection, expand the collection, as well as have programs like this and present speakers on topics related to World War II. The estate also arranged for us to accept Ms. Taylor's own collection of cooking and culinary arts books, and you'll be hearing more about that in the coming months. We'll have some events related to those as well. The two collections included 315 World War II books, 116 World War II films, and 790 cookbooks and culinary books for a total of 1,221 items. They were shipped from Dearborn here by moving van. Louise Hudson, who is the retired Randleman librarian, said that some years ago, Ms. Taylor told her that when she passed, she would leave her collection of books to the library, and she made good on that vow. Ms. Taylor's sister, Kathy Hunt, is here tonight, and I would like to share our condolences with you on the loss of your sister and let you know how grateful we are that she considered us as one of the ways to let her husband's legacy and her own legacy live on. The books and DVDs from the Taylor collection, the ones we've added to the collection so far, are over here on the shelf tops, and they're available for checkout, so please take a look at them and enjoy them. I'll now call on Mayor David Smith to introduce our speaker, and he may have the most challenging task this evening of introducing someone who really needs no introduction. So, Mayor Smith, the challenge is yours.
Thank you, Ross. It is my pleasure to introduce someone who, to many of you, needs absolutely no introduction. John is a man who has given his life of service to the community as a volunteer firefighter, as an innovative fire chief, as a member of the city council for 18 years. He was born in Guilford County in 1923. His family moved him to Asheboro when he was 6 months old, and they lived on the corner of Hoover and Church Street, right across from what is the City Hall. And the original City Hall was right there also. They tore that building down to build the City Hall that we have now. And behind their house was a little stable, livery stable. And as a child, John earned candy by helping rub the horses down at the stables. He attended Fayetteville Street School, which many of you remember was right over here on Fayetteville Street, right there across from the Advance Auto. And prior to that, I think that was an A&P store, A&P grocery store. And he told me he carried the Charlotte Observer as a young man. He had it for 3 years. He delivered papers, the Charlotte Observer. And his route was the only route in town, and he carried from Asheboro Plumbing down there right at the bypass on Sunset, down to right below the high school where 64 crosses at Stedman's, over to Clyde Lucas's house up here on Worth Street, the very dead end of Worth Street, and up past the hospital. So, that was quite a route. I was amazed that the route was that big. And he said he did that on foot except for 6 months when he had a bicycle, 6 weeks I think he said when he had a bicycle. He loaned his bicycle to somebody and it got run over, so he was back on foot. A week before he turned 18, he enlisted in the Army Air Corps. Once he did his basic training, a series of different jobs, and he's going to tell you a little bit about that tonight, how he ended up as a reconnaissance photographer in the military. And I hope he gets to tell you how many different theaters and deployments he had. He was all over the world. Doing what he did, he could be there for 6 months and then move on somewhere else. After the war, he returned to Asheboro and married Jane Gilback. Many of you know his wife Jane, knew his wife Jane, and his brother-in-law David Gilback. Together they started John David Photography here in Asheboro, and that was a natural because of what he did. I've got some pictures right up here on the front that he took of scenes of Asheboro in the late 40s when they had John David Photography. The Randolph room has a large collection of John David Photography pictures, but the Chamber of Commerce probably has possibly the largest collection. They have hundreds of pictures that John and his brother-in-law took in the 40s and 50s, and some of them are right here on the table. Before you come up and see those afterwards. The photography business began to fail when department stores started doing photography and drugstores started doing mail order photography, and everybody could afford a camera. At that point, John took a couple of different jobs around town, but during that time he was a volunteer fireman. And Chief Clarence Rush talked him into applying to be a full-time fireman, and he was only the sixth full-time fireman hired in the city of Asheboro. In 1961, he succeeded Chief Rush as only the third chief in the history of Asheboro Fire Department. By the time he retired as chief in 1985, there were 36 employees. He was responsible for the new fire station on Church Street and the new fire station in North Asheboro. He implemented training and fire protection programs, brought fire safety lessons to the school children, and after retirement he served 18 years on the Asheboro City Council. He retired in 2005 from that elected position, and he was the first recipient of the key to the city of Asheboro. It is, as Tom Brokaw said, called this the greatest generation. John is truly a member of the greatest generation, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you a true Asheboro treasure, my friend John McGlohon.
I was expecting 25 people. I'm sure somebody told you Elvis was going to be here. But I do appreciate you taking your time to come out to hear an old man ramble. Because what I've got to talk about tonight happened 71 years ago. And unfortunately, I'm the last person on earth that can tell you the story. I hope you won't be bored. I joined the Air Force on my 18th birthday, was sent immediately down to Maxwell Field in Montgomery, Alabama. There I went through boot camp, and with nothing but good luck. I have been lucky all my life. With luck, I was assigned directly from boot camp to the 3rd Photo Mapping Squadron. In January of 1942, the squadron moved from Maxwell Field, Alabama, down to McGlohon Field, Florida. And from there, over the next 2.5 years, they were deployed on 3 rather amazing missions, and I was lucky enough to take part in each of those. Our first mission went to South America, where we mapped the east coast of South America, mapping the air routes for future airplanes that would be on their way to Africa by the southern route. We flew twin-engine C-45s. We flew with the pilot and the photographer. It was short flights, but it was in some very uncomfortable positions. With that mission complete, we returned to the States, and not too long after that, our next deployment took us to Alaska. This time we were supplied with North American B-25s, and instead of a 2-man crew, we now had a 5-man crew. We went to Alaska and we mapped what is now the Alcan Highway, up through Canada and Alaska. While we were there, we mapped the entire state of Alaska, including the Aleutian Islands. That was the most interesting, some beautiful country up there. The third deployment carried us a little further. We switched again from the B-25 to the consolidated B-24, and now we picked up a 9-man crew, and we went the southern route that we had mapped out before. We went to Natal, Brazil, across to the Ascension Islands, across Africa, and into India. Is this coming through all right?
Yes.
Across and into the city of Gushkara in India. And from there, we mapped what is referred to as the hump, the air routes over the Himalaya mountains from the Assam Valley over to Kunming in China. You can imagine what it's like to be flying across there with Mount Everest sitting off your wingtip. Rough country. But with those 3 deployments, we returned to the States, and we were moved from MacDill Field in Tampa, Florida, out to Smoky Hill Air Force Base in Salina, Kansas. And there we were preparing for our next deployment, which would be the islands in the Pacific once they were secured. We were doing practice for long-range missions. We were using small B-17s and flying 12, 14 hours just to get used to being in the air a while. We were waiting to accept the B-29, the best airplane that we had at the time. It was just coming off the assembly line, and we were transitioning for that. The B-29, once configured for reconnaissance, was referred to as an F-13. So if I mix up 29s and 13s, you'll know why. Before the squadron could leave for the Pacific, we got a request from the commanding general in China that he needed additional reconnaissance. So out of the 3rd Photo Squadron, 4 crews were chosen to go back to China. We took brand new B-29s. Ours was the 6th one that came out of the factory in Wichita. And with the 4 crews, we went right back over the same routes we had come, back to South America, over across the ocean, across Africa. Instead of stopping in India, we ended up this time in the village of Xinqing, which was just out of the city of Shantou in China. From there, our mission was to map and recon the east coast of China, out across the Shantung Peninsula, up as far north as Mukden, Manchuria, and on one occasion we were inside of Vladivostok, Russia. On our return trip to our base, we'd fly down the Korean Peninsula and map that, and then across the Yellow Sea, doing sea search and looking for Japanese shipping, both military and mercantile. We realized at that time that We were photographing airfields that had fighter planes on the ground, and they were not making any effort to come up to meet us. So we felt that the Japanese supply lines were depleted and they had nothing to fly with. With that in mind, the command in China released us, and we were diverted from the city of Xinjiang down to the island of Guam in the Marianas. There we rejoined the unit that we had left in Salina, Kansas. We were stationed at Harlan Field in Agana on Guam, and there the airport, the topography was such that we could not take a fully loaded B-29 off the ground and take it to the islands. So if we had a mission set for tomorrow morning, we would fly up the afternoon before, fly about 12 miles to Northfield. There we would load the gas, the ammunition, the cameras, check the airplane out, put a guard on it, and they would truck us back down to Agana. We'd get our supper, go to bed for a couple of hours, be awakened again about 2 o'clock in the morning, fed breakfast, truck back to Northfield. Once we pre-flight the airplane there, we would take off of the field at Northfield. And when you took off there, as you went off the end of the runway, you were already airborne. You went right off the cliffs out over the ocean. Our normal flight would have been that we would have flown at low altitude until we were within about an hour of the homeland. At that time, we would start climbing for altitude that had been assigned to us for that day. And we'd put on our flak suits, get our oxygen bottle. The B-29 was pressurized. Fortunately, we did not have to wear an oxygen mask all the time, but you had to have some ability in case of an emergency and it deflated. So we put on our flak suits, which consisted of heavy armor plating, chest and back. The helmet was metal. It looked like a football helmet, because the minute we crossed the islands, we knew we were going to be shot at. Being a lone airplane, the Japanese fighters seldom approached us, but the anti-aircraft fire never ceased. Sometimes it looked like you could get out and walk on it. But we would just make our assigned flight for that day. It might be 12 hours, it might be 16 hours. When we got back to Guam late in the afternoon, it was my job to take the lab that we had done that day and take it over to the lab. Leaving the lab, I'd go back to the barracks, and we were through until our next assignment. So that was normal. We maybe flew twice a week. On the morning of August the 6th, 1945, it was no different from us. On the 5th, we went over, flew the plane up to Northfield, loaded it up, checked it out, went back to our barracks, went to bed, got up, we'll haul back over to Northfield, and about 3 o'clock in the morning, we rolled off the end of the runway out over the Pacific. We followed the same pattern that we normally would have. As we approached the home islands, we climbed the altitude, which that day was, I think, assigned at about 25,000 feet. And we crossed over to homeland somewhere around 8:30. I've never been sure of the exact time. As we approached the city of Hiroshima, one of the gunners just called over the intercom. He said, somebody's headed for Iwo. So Iwo Jima was the nearest emergency airfield. And it was not unusual to see if there was a plane out in front, a bomb strike, another reconnaissance plane, that if they had problems, They would salvo their bomb load to light the plane, and they would try to make it to Hiroshima. So it wasn't unusual that he had seen another plane. But shortly thereafter, and we could never decide among ourselves whether it was 10 seconds, 30 seconds, or a minute and a half, but in a short period of time after this remark over the intercom, there was a brilliant white flash directly below us and around us. It was something we'd never seen before. We saw towns burning every day, but we had never seen anything. It was just as if somebody had fired a great big flash bullet right in your eyes. The pilots, the gunners out in the blister, the pilot up in the front were temporarily blinded. I learned later that the inaugurated crew had goggles and gloves to protect them from radiation and so forth. Our crew had nothing. My only vision from my position in the B-29 was through a 12-inch glass directly between my feet and the bottom of the airplane. So the only way I could see out of the airplane was to look straight down. And when my eyes adjusted to this flash, what I saw was a humongous cloud just rolling up at us. It was so different from anything that we had ever seen. I assumed that that airplane that we had seen had salvoed his bomb load and hit an ammunition dump. And I didn't want him to be disappointed, so I reached over and turned on my cameras so that I could record his good hit. Once I turned the cameras on, they were automatic. They ran until I cut them off. So I don't know how long I sat there, but the boys up in the gunnery compartment, I could hear them chattering about it, telling me what they were seeing. So I picked up a handheld 4x5 camera, walked up into the gunnery compartment, and took pictures of the cloud that was now several thousand foot above our altitude. This wasn't part of our flight plan for the day, so the pilots and the navigators continued right on. We just flew on off. Our lines that day took us over the northern island of Hokkaido, and we